Hi guys, Brian from Brian Boas here. Baby boa season is here, and many of you guys are probably thinking about acquiring some new animals to add to your collections. Today I'm going to discuss buying a boa directly from a breeder and how to maximize your chances of success at getting the animal you want, as well as how to make the process go as smoothly as possible. This is a viewer suggested video topic, so thank you very much for the suggestion. And if you have any topics that you would like to see covered in future videos, please feel free to reach out to me. So as you probably know, we're kind of in a seller's market right now, especially with locality boas, and there really are not a huge supply to go around of many different localities, and the demand has been quite strong. So there are a number of things you can do if you want to get that perfect boa to maximize your chances of success. And the first things to do actually start well before you're thinking of buying the boa or the boa is available, and that's kind of your background research. And so the first thing you should do is just figure out what types of boas you want. And there, as you probably know, there's a huge number of different locality and morph boas. Some are more common than others. If you just are looking for your first pet, you probably can pick up a nice common boa at your local pet shop or via the classifieds or a reptile show, something like that. But if you want a specific type of locality boa that's not offered very often, it might be a little more difficult. For example, this is an anerythristic Paraguanera peninsula boa named Anubis, and these animals, there's only a few breeders working with these, so they don't come available that often. When they do, they typically go really fast. So if you want something like this, typically you're going to have to do a little groundwork ahead of time to make sure that you have the opportunity to acquire this type of animal. And so the first thing is just do your research, decide what types of boas that you want. And for this, there's a huge number of resources available, both online and offline. Online, you can go to the different boa forums, you can see what people are working with, you can ask questions, you can go to the different Facebook boa groups. There's general boa groups, as well as specific groups that focus on a type of boa, like sunglow boas or longicauda boas or Argentine boas. You can see lots of pictures of people's boas, get an idea of what's out there, and you really focus on what you're interested in. And especially if you're new to boas, it's really important to focus. Just pick a few types of boas because there's so much variety. It can be overwhelming to try to do it all. There's also a lot of really great books out there that go over boas and their care. And in the description under this video, I've listed a number of my recommended boa books. So those are good books to check out to get the background information on the different types of boas that are available. So while you're doing this background research online or offline, you can also get acquainted with the different breeders, see what they're working with. Breeders will often have a Facebook page. They'll list put up pictures of the animals they're working with, as well as the litters that they've had. You can go back and look back at their history, going back the last few years to see what they produced. And that should give you a pretty good idea about the breeders that are out there, what they're working with, and what breeders you want to follow if you're interested in a specific animal. And that's kind of why I do these videos, to give people an idea of what I'm working with and what I might have available in the months and years ahead. You can also reach out to the breeder at this point, kind of inquire about future litters that are going to be available, get information about his or her breeding stock, etc. Although the breeder might not have explicit plans, or the breeder might not know, often breeding boas, there's definitely an element of luck. So we can anticipate what we're going to have, but we can't really be sure because until the babies are born, you just don't know. But it's a good idea to reach out ahead of time and get acquainted with the breeders, just so when they have the litters ready, you have some idea about how the process is going to go. And I think it's also a really good idea during your initial research stage to get an idea about prices and how the boa market is moving. As you probably know, prices of many boas, especially some of the rarer locality boas, can change really fast lately. So if you go to the different online reptile classifieds like Fauna Classifieds, King Snake, and Morph Market, you can look at what boas are selling for, or at least being listed for. And in some of the sites like Morph Market and especially Fauna, you can look back over the years and see what the animals sold for in previous years. And this should give you a pretty good idea about the direction that the market is going. And that way, when it comes time for the animals to come up for sale, you can know if it's a reasonable price or whether the price seems a little bit high, etc. You can also see how frequently the animal has come up for sale. And if you're talking about a boa that's relatively common, like a sunglow boa, maybe you really want to shop around and get one that you really like and that you think is really the highest quality you can find. Some of the more rare locality boas, unfortunately, the litters only are available in some cases every year or even every other year, something like that. So if you see that the boa has very rarely been offered in the past, this should give you a pretty good idea that it's going to be a little bit harder to find. Once you've done your background research and kind of know what areas you want to focus on, you can anticipate when animals are going to be born. Typically, locality boas are born between the summer and fall. Morph boas sometimes a little bit earlier than that. In fact, morph boas these days are born pretty much any time of year, but it seems like most of the litters for both morph and locality boas are born in over the summer or early fall. So that's probably the time you want to be watching the social media, seeing what litters breeders have available. However, this doesn't mean they're available at that time. Most breeders will spend at least a few months getting their animals acclimated, feeding, making sure that they're ready to go. So after a litter is born, you might want to contact the breeder, but you don't want to pester them too much because they're probably not going to be ready. But you can anticipate that the animals might be available within a few months so that you can be ready when they come up for sale if you see the animal that you really want. Some breeders do wait lists where you can put your name on a list and then they may contact you when the animals are ready, and typically it's in order of priority. First come, first served on the list. Some breeders actually charge money to be on the waiting list. You have to pay a deposit, which goes towards the purchase price of your baby boa. For me, I don't do waiting lists. I've tried it in the past. I did a video about why I don't do them, so check it out if you're interested. But I think the most fair and productive way is first come, first served once the babies are ready to go. So be sure that you're ready to go and commit to buying when the babies are available. Of course, you want to ask the breeder any questions before you pay for the baby though. So you don't want to get in too quickly. Make sure you ask the background questions about the animals, how old they are, what they're feeding on, what bloodline they come from. Make sure you understand the breeder's terms of sale. I've seen some really unpleasant disputes that break out online in the forums between a buyer and a breeder, and typically these happen because the buyer didn't ask the questions and didn't really understand the terms of sale, and or the breeder didn't make it clear what the terms of sale are. So make sure that you ask all these questions ahead of time. You don't want this kind of dispute to break out. One topic that comes up a lot when breeders are selling babies is a topic of pictures of the animal. And so sometimes breeders will put individual pictures of each animal. Sometimes they'll just put representative pictures of litter mates or similar animals to give you an idea of what the animal looks like, but it's not the exact same animal. So whenever possible, I put individual pictures of the animals, at least one or two. Sometimes I'll put pictures of the parents as well. Sometimes if I don't put them in the ad, I can provide them on request. But depending on the breeder, they might feel differently. It's obviously a good idea to look at the picture of the boa before you buy it, and the vast majority of buyers are not going to buy a boa sight unseen. That being said, a lot of buyers are kind of unreasonable in their requests for the numbers of pictures. They just want more and more. If you look at the pictures provided, if they give you a pretty good idea about the boa, you should feel fine with that, especially if the breeder has a good reputation. Sometimes a breeder will have a picture that's really not that good. Maybe it's out of focus, or maybe it only shows part of the boa, not the entire body of the boa. In which case, yeah, request another picture. But if the breeder has provided a decent picture or two of the boa, I wouldn't request any more, because taking pictures of boas is a difficult undertaking. They rarely will sit still. It takes a lot of time. If you think about if you went into a professional portrait studio, how much the photographer would charge you for a sitting, it's not cheap. So think about that. The breeder has to go back, take more pictures. I've had some people that buy animals and they're requesting photos like every week. on a payment plan, which is kind of crazy because the boa really isn't changing that much, if at all. So be considerate when you're requesting these photos. And sometimes when buyers are requesting more and more pictures, it pisses the breeder off and they don't want to deal with you. And so you might not be able to get the animal you want. Sometimes breeders do not provide individual pictures. They just provide representative pictures. And I bought several boas this way. I didn't know exactly what the animal looked like because I didn't have a picture of the exact animal. And this is an example. This is a beautiful Barranquilla Colombia Boa. I did not see the picture of this animal. I trusted the breeder, from previous interactions with him and his reputation, and I was just blown away by the quality of this animal. I mean, it's much nicer than I could have ever imagined in the picture. So in some cases, you trust the breeder. I don't think you'll be let down. The other thing is that I think people who don't really know boas have this idea that the quality is so variable within a litter. But the truth is, if you have a high quality litter, all the babies are probably going to be really nice. And some boas, like redtails, true redtails, there might be more of a variability. Other animals, like the longicauda boas, I just had a litter of longicauda, and I'm looking at the 12 babies, and to me, I can't really tell any difference in quality of these animals. They're all really nice animals. So don't obsess about, well, I need this one, I can't have that one, this one is slightly better quality. Another thing that really, I think, drives breeders crazy is when you constantly ask them questions about, well, is this one better than this one, or is this one better? Because it's individual opinion, and really, they're all really nice. What I typically notice with my babies, and I typically will sell them all for the same price from a given litter, is that the animals that sell are really the ones that have the nicest picture. So an animal was just a little more cooperative on picture day, and we got a nicer picture, it's more likely to sell. Not because it's better quality. And if you're overly picky with litters, there's a chance that you might miss out because all the babies might sell before you make up your mind. So keep that in mind. It might be a year or even many years before this type of boa is going to be available again. Another topic is the choice of sex, whether you should get a male or female or both. What I've seen happen sometimes with buyers is that they're obsessed with getting females. And the thing about this is these people, they're not breeders, they have no experience breeding, and they don't really understand that when you breed boas, it's not just you have a bunch of females, you got one stud male, who knocks up like a half a dozen females, and then the babies pop out, 6 months later. Believe me, it does not work that way. With breeding boas, you typically need at least as many males as females. Sometimes you want to do multiple males on the same female to increase your odds of success. Sometimes you have a male that just turns out to be not a very good breeder, so having backup males is definitely a good idea. So you'll typically want to make sure you have plenty of males. And so what most breeders will do, depending on the sex ratio of their litter, often they will only sell females as part of a pair, particularly if they're light on females. So if you want a pet boa, you can get a male. And in many cases, people want a male as a pet because the male might not get quite as big as the female, and they're looking for a smaller animal. But don't be obsessed with buying up all the females. Sometimes breeders do have excess females. They might sell an individual female. Sometimes they'll just charge more for females. It depends. But even if you are planning on breeding eventually, you should definitely be focused on buying males as well as females. If you buy a boa but you're not going to be paying 100% up front, some breeders will do a payment plan. And typically this works with a deposit of something like 25% down, and the remainder is due within 30 days or whatever the period that the breeder specifies. And so typically the animal will be shipped after the payment is received in full. Some breeders don't charge extra for these plans. Some will charge an extra fee up front, like an extra percentage. Others might charge you for the amount of the food that it costs to feed the animal while the animal is being held. So just make sure you ask your breeder. And typically the deposit is not refundable, so if you did back out, you would lose this deposit. And this is because the breeder has taken the animal off of the market and deprived other buyers of the opportunity to buy the animal for the time being, as well as put in extra care for the animal. So don't be surprised if you do lose that money if you have to back out for whatever reason. Once you've bought your boa, the breeder has to get it to you. And so most breeders, of course, are going to be shipping the boa to you. Make sure you understand this ahead of time. If there's somebody selling boas and they don't do shipping, you have to take this into account. If you need to pick the boa up, you have to make sure that it's within a reasonable driving distance. But most breeders are going to be shipping to you via FedEx. And they'll use FedEx priority overnight. And so for this to work, you need to provide the seller or the breeder with all of your shipping information, your full shipping address, your phone number, as well as your email, which the breeder will use to get a FedEx shipping label to ship your animal out to you. So when it comes to the time and day of shipping, it's ultimately up to the breeder. So there are several times in the year when it's not okay to ship reptiles. If the temperature is too hot or too cold, you're not going to be able to get the animal, and the breeder isn't going to be shipping it to you. So sometimes if it's kind of borderline, breeders can use heat packs, and that's sufficient to ensure the animal makes it okay. But the risk of death of the animal is on the hands of the breeder. So if something happens, the breeder is going to lose the animal and be out of the money for the sale and have to refund the money to the buyer. So it's always up to the breeder. So you may need to wait a few months. I've had to wait in some cases several months for animals over the summer. I bought an animal at the beginning of the summer, and then it just got too hot, and the animal couldn't be shipped until it cooled down in the fall. And again, this is frustrating, but it's always up to the breeder, not the seller. Do not insist that the seller sell you or ship you an animal at a certain time when it's really not okay to ship. Even if the breeder says, well, then I'm not responsible for any death. A competent breeder wouldn't ship, because breeders, we don't want these precious animals we put so much time into to die during shipping. So be cognizant of this, and do not insist that the shipper or the breeder ship your animal at any given time. And so when the weather is appropriate, usually the breeder will tell you a few possible dates or ask you when it would be okay to ship. On the day that the breeder is going to ship, make sure you're going to be at home or available to pick the animal up. Because if the animal is delivered by FedEx and left on your front porch for a few hours, there might be a chance that something might happen to the animal, causing its death or injury, and the breeder wouldn't be responsible for this loss, depending on their terms of sale. And so a lot of breeders are shipping only to the FedEx shipping hubs. They won't ship to the individual house addresses. And I can understand this because it lowers the risk, because then the animal isn't taken from the FedEx shipping hub, put on the FedEx truck, driven all over the place, possibly in the heat, before being delivered. Right now, I'm still shipping my own animals to people's addresses, but in the future, I might require people to pick up at the FedEx shipping hub. It just lowers the risk of any damage to the snake. And so when the animal is going to be shipped, also make sure that you get the tracking number, and so that you can follow the shipping progress of the animal, and that you can know when it's going to arrive and anticipate that. Typically with FedEx priority overnight, the animal will arrive either by 10:30 a.m. or by noon to most addresses, or in some cases with rural and out of the way addresses, it doesn't arrive until 4 p.m. So you may need to wait around all day just to make sure that you're available when the animal arrives, or be able to go to the FedEx ship center to pick your animal up. Once your animal arrives or you pick it up at the FedEx ship center, make sure you open the package as soon as possible. Don't wait. And you want to inspect the contents, make sure the animal is okay. If there's any issues with the animal or with the packaging, make sure to contact the breeder as soon as possible. You also want to take pictures of what you see, just so you can send to the breeder, just to make them aware. Breeders always like to hear back from the recipients, so even if there's nothing wrong, please contact the breeder. Let them know that the package arrived okay. Let them know what you think of the snake, whether you like it, whether it's just okay, whether it greatly exceeded your expectations, etc. This feedback is definitely really valuable to breeders. If you do have some kind of issue with the snake or the shipment, please make sure to try to resolve it with the breeder and wait and let the breeder respond and make this situation right before you trash the breeder on one of the online forums. And I've seen quite a few instances where people had a transaction go wrong, and they start this thread on one of these forums and they get all these people kind of getting amped up and spreading a lot of negativity. And I gotta wonder what the truth is. I mean, obviously this is their side of the story. Maybe there was another side that we didn't hear about from the breeder. But often if you've already gone onto one of these forums and, spread this information, people will see it, and it's really bad for the whole herp community as a whole. So again, make sure you try to work with your breeder and only resort to these forums if the situation isn't getting resolved. There's also, unfortunately, a few unethical breeders and sellers out there, so sometimes these forums are really necessary in order to resolve some kind of issue that's going on, as well as to warn other people not to deal with these individuals. And so, assuming everything's fine with your animal, make sure you go through the recommended quarantine and acclimation procedures. I did a video on that in the past you might want to check out. But typically you want to wait at least 5 to 7 days before feeding your animal. You don't want to overly handle your animal in the first week or stress it out. You just want to give it time to acclimate in a quarantine cage away from the rest of your collection. And so the last piece of advice I would give you is keep in touch with your breeder. Sometimes I have people I've sold to who will send me a picture of their animal years later, and it's really always great watching them grow up. They're almost like my grandchildren in a way, and seeing how they develop, and it really gives me a great sense of satisfaction to see this. And I've also made some really good friendships with people over the years who I've sold to. When you make friends with breeders, you also maybe can get an inside edge on their upcoming litters, and sometimes breeders will give you access to animals you might not have access to otherwise. So it's always good to befriend the breeders, let them know how your animals are doing. Typically they really like the feedback. And in fact, this animal is a 2014 Suriname female that was born here. And in fact, this animal I sold to somebody and they raised it for a few years. And then, they kept in touch with me as, became close friends. And then they had to get out of reptile breeding and keeping. And I actually bought the animal back. I, liked it so much. And this female actually had her first litter this year, my Prometheus line babies, which some of them will be for sale in a little bit here. So, always keep in touch with breeders. We're not in this for the money. We're in this hopefully because we love the animals. And, as I mentioned, sometimes if possible, I even buy my animals back. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for watching and enjoy your boas.